I knew immediately that I needed to start the company in a different way. I needed to be first and foremost a shipping container company, not a shipping container modification company. I knew that I needed to get into the port and I needed to be able to buy containers at cost from shipping lines
Yep.
because I didn't have that during COVID. And it really, really hurt me when the constraint on all the supply chains happened. So now I go, well, I think I started with Container Exchange. I made the
Mm-hmm.
connections through Container Exchange to get directly with some of these larger companies. And then I literally just made St. Pete Box LLC. I just thought, well, everyone knows St. Pete and everyone knows Box, so I just put it together. And
Yep.
I
Yep.
didn't believe that it was going to be available, and it was. So that was like serendipitous, right?
Welcome to the Built to Rent podcast, where we cover all things rentals, all things recurring revenue, and in some cases, all things passive income, although not all of the businesses that we'll be covering will be passive. So I just wanted to get that out there. And this episode is brought to you in part by good friends over at NPSA, or National Portable Storage Association. They're a nonprofit organization, npsa.org, but they're specifically dedicated to the portable storage industry, which makes them really unique. So all of the resources, legal, membership directory, anything in and around portable storage, if you're looking to start or grow your portable storage business, NPSA is the place that you go. I'll also say this. Team over there is pretty awesome, and long before they were partners on the podcast, we were actually customers of theirs, and we found out about it through the national conference. And this next conference in 2025 is going to be in none other than Las Vegas at the Paris Hotel, April 6th through the 8th. So if you're looking to start your business, if you're looking to grow your business, if you have anything to do with the portable storage industry, you want to be in Las Vegas from April 6th through the 8th. They continue to up the ante every year, and I'm sure next year is going to be absolutely amazing. I'll be there. I hope to see you there. Hope you enjoy the show. I'd love when I start talking to folks, in addition to doing business, also want to take some time to kind of unpack these stories, man, because I think everyone's going through something as they build, right? Everyone's navigating something. So to kind of hear what it's truly like to run a business day in, day out, people see the websites, people see the Instagram feeds, people will hear about some awesome stuff that you got in the works, but it takes a hell of a lot of work to get to that point. So tell them more of those stories. And truly letting people know what it's like to kind of build the brands that they interact with online is really the entire genesis of Built to Rent.
The issue is most of the time you don't end up where you start, And I mean, that seems like an obvious thing to say, but if you get into this business, I got into this business as a welder and a fabricator, but I don't do any welding or fabricating very much anymore. And so you end up filling your day with things that you're probably not the best at. So you have to learn to get good at stuff that you never thought that you would have to do, which is unfortunate because I think you have to keep a part of you invested in the things that gave you a reason to get into the business in the first place. Some background on myself is I'm the youngest of six. I'm from Florida. I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida. 3 brothers, 2 sisters. Unfortunately, I had some hard times. I lost one of my brothers 2 years ago, August,
Sorry to hear
actually.
that.
And then I lost my best friend that I started the container business with about 4 months ago.
Wow.
Grew up the son of an immigrant. My dad, Saverio's from Italy, like off the boat. He immigrated through Canada, through Switzerland, Canada, and then to the States. And he actually met my mom when he had already had 2 kids, and my mom had 3 kids, and they together had me. So I'm the only one from both my parents. So we have a tight family, and it's a tight, Italian Irish family.
So youngest is 6 though. So how do you think that shapes you at all?
I mean, I got to see what not to do, probably most importantly, but at the same time, like, I mean, I probably haven't had this conversation a lot with my brothers and sisters, but you're constantly looking at what they're doing and trying to either fit in or get there. You know what I mean? Like when you're a kid and you grow up as the youngest, you're always trying to be older than you actually are. And so I think in that, I don't know if that's done really anything for my business, but for my psyche, it's always allowed me to be fond of people with more experience than me. I always listen to other people's experiences. It doesn't even have to be advice. It can just be them talking about something. I love to listen to people that have done it before me. Also, too, because like, they're lunatics when they're kids and you're like 6 and they're like 16, right?
Right.
And that's how the age difference was. I mean, it kind of prepares you for the insanity of the world a little bit and it has allowed me to take chances that I don't think my brothers and sisters were allowed to take. Like my brothers and sisters, because they were, that first generation of children, weren't really allowed to make mistakes and weren't really allowed to take the risks and stuff that I was. I was like the coddled, like, here, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can go chase your dream. You know what I mean? And that actually brings me to, my original destiny in life was a musician.
Wow.
I went to Berklee College of Music. I dropped out because my band got signed to a major label. Just like everything else that happens in music, we got dropped, and I wanted to stay within the industry, and so I became a recording engineer.
Wait. We gotta unpack the band.
Oh man, that's
but before
hard,
before
man.
we go
It's hard.
there,
It hurts my heart.
I will disagree with you. I think the psyche of you, the youngest of the family, what that does to your psyche, I don't think you can separate the psyche of the individual and the business owner, because I do think, to your point, you're probably out taking risks that your brothers and sisters don't. I mean, I look at my life, I look at my older brothers. We didn't talk about being entrepreneurs growing up. I mean, so it wasn't something that was topical, just sort of something that you fall into.
It's funny you say that. We didn't either. We didn't talk about that either.
It just didn't exist. You're just like, oh yeah, I'm trying to make money, but it's like, what's an entrepreneur? I had no idea what that was. But I think what shapes you in sort of the psyche, I think there's sort of this philosophy of like born entrepreneur or like trained entrepreneur. I think a lot of what goes into the psyche and the risk taking is sort of what's involved in being a business owner. No different than, sort of to dovetail that to your story. You were in a band and then a sound engineer and sort of had this winding road, but you got to unpack the band piece. This is the first time I'm hearing
I was
this.
a drummer. I grew up loving music and playing music. I started with keyboard. My cousin Aldo taught me keyboard, which is, piano, really.
That's dope.
And then I got kind of good at that, and then I didn't play it for a long time. And then in middle school, for some reason, I chose to play the clarinet in middle school, and I was terrible at
Everybody
it.
plays the clarinet.
Oh man, I was so bad at it, and I'm so bad at reeded instruments, and it's shrieky, and even if you're the best clarinet player in the world, it's really an acquired taste to listen to, right? So one day I went over to my buddy Joey's house, and he had a drum set, and I just sat behind the drum set and just started playing, like just naturally. Just I could play a beat, I could move around the drum set. So I was like, I think I want to do this, and so I did that in middle school, formed a band, and then just formed bands in high school and played. We were in the scene, like I was that musician guy in high school that was always in a band. We were always playing out. We were friends with all the other bands. A lot of our bands practiced together in warehouses, much like this one. We rent a warehouse and share it amongst bands. And so I knew that my parents would want me to do something more conservative, so they wanted me to go to college. And so I was like, well, if I'm gonna go to
Now,
college,
do you think that's the immigrant sort of nature to say, like, we did all of this stuff not for you to go and
no, I don't
you need to go?
So I don't think so. Not to interrupt you, but I think so. My father never really talked to me about where I should go directionally, because he's the immigrant, and my mom was always the one that was really like forceful in terms of like getting an education. And if you are going to do the music thing, do it legitimately, which means going to music school, going to college for music. And
that's great advice.
Yeah. And I don't think my dad just was supportive of anything that I wanted to do. Just a great father, And so when my mom wanted me to go to college, I was like, well, there's only one college I want to go to. It's Berklee College of Music. Like, that's the school for me, So I didn't even have backups. I sent them an audition and luckily got accepted. And I was only there for like a little over a year, my first year. And that was because I kept pushing with my band back home in Florida. And we ended up, we got some like, kind of got exposure on MySpace and got a little bit of a following online, but we probably weren't the best band to be signed because we didn't do a lot of touring. And And because of that, we were kind of like the label's band as opposed to the people's band, where the label saw, they were like, oh, these guys are really good because we were technically good. So I think they thought they could make us into something. And that's oftentimes what these, yeah, that's what these record labels do. If they can start with a band that's just really, really good players, they can find music for us to play. And I think that was always the idea.
There's no sort of wealth transfer. You're not like, all right, we got signed, we're putting cash in our pocket. I'm sure you get in advance maybe to make music and then go into the studio.
We didn't even get that far. We got really, really shafted. So we were on a label called Windark Records, and it was Seven Dusts. It was our label mates were Seven Dust and maybe one other band, maybe even a local band that got signed. But they were on tour, and we got signed, and it was all being put under this new label, Windark Records. It was actually Camille Barbone who found Madonna, and Gary Katz, who was Steely Dan's producer. Those were the people. Those were the players. A lawyer stole pretty much all the money from the label. He embezzled all the money. And so what that did is that put Seven Dust out because they were on tour when this happened. So all their funding, all the money to pay for everybody on the tour got yanked. So they were in the middle of a tour and they got yanked. We didn't even get to do the development deal. We didn't even get to do, we were paying for recording time and going into Brian Merrill's studio here in St. Pete on our own dime. So we didn't even get a chance to get recouped. And then they strung us along for, I want to say, a couple years, hey, we're going to fix this. We're going to get the money back. Right. We're going to do that. Just keep playing. Just keep, they just kept us on the shelf. And eventually, man,
that stinks.
You're a 21-year-old kid that all of a sudden you turn around, you're 24, you're 25. The band's not doing that well. And from my point of view, my parents were like, well, why don't you do something to where you can stay in music, but you're not cut out to be in a signed band or whatever. And that's fine.
Right.
But I don't think I should have done that. I think I loved playing music. I didn't love engineering. I became very good at it, and I did work with a lot of really, really big people. I was the executive engineer for the Sound Killers, and Rio, who's one of the Sound Killers, produced the Beyonce song Hello, not Halo, and the Bruno Mars. And,
is it Hello?
Hello, yeah, Hello. She
not the
starts with the piano part that he sampled, but he also produced Bruno Mars and Lil Wayne Mirrors. So I mean, I got to work on a lot of big stuff. I moved to Holland for a while, and I had a recording studio in Amsterdam. I built the 5th Red Bull recording studio in the world, which is in Amsterdam in my old studio. So I did really, really great stuff. And to kind of
sounds like you didn't love it. You didn't truly love it like you loved making music, though. I loved it as much as I could
convince myself to love it.
Yeah.
Because I really loved making music, and I really loved producing music. I didn't want to get stuck as the guy that's like always just, twisting knobs and, having people punch in on Pro Tools. Like that wasn't my dream.
Right.
And it becomes exhausting because you're forced to make money with whoever is going to pay you. That means if they're good or they're bad. I've mixed records for Clive Davis. I've mixed records for the biggest people in the industry. I've worked with the biggest people in the industry, and it still was not fulfilling. And it wasn't fulfilling. And I'll touch on this just a very little bit. But,
no, this is fascinating, man.
But the stuff that you're hearing about in the news right now, like the Diddy stuff, it's not unique to Diddy. It's not unique to any one type of person. It's not unique to a type of music. It's not just hip hop. It's rock music. It's pop music. It's writers. It's producers. It's agents. It's a dysfunctional industry because you have a lot of people with pure talent, and all they think about is creating art and all that. And then you have people that can't create at all, and so they need to marginalize those artists and be able to leverage them against themselves to be able to make money.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and I don't even think it's all music. I think if you start looking into and hearing stories about actors, comedians, actresses, it's sort of broad spectrum. I think it does take a very specific person to be successful at those types of things. And then sort of the way you come up and the way that you are made successful sort of breeds a type of person and a type of way and the type of people that surround you. So I think people are quiet probably because they have some of the same skeletons in their closet as well. I completely agree. It's not just Diddy. It ain't just rap music. I think it's
everybody.
definitely
and
more.
It's also
everybody.
what you just said, that relationship between management and creatives.
So you're navigating this world. You've got a life in Holland. You're sort of, steeped in music. You're an engineer for tons of folks. You got to send us over some of the early band work. But then you sort of morph into what you were doing, welding. How did you transition from sort of life and music into that?
Yeah, almost 15 years ago. So I had a background in doing production and recording and stuff in Las Vegas. So I had an opportunity to go out there and work for MGM Grand. I had a recording studio in Signature, which is like a high-end condo that's on the MGM Grand facility, and they allowed me to put my recording studio in this penthouse so that I could offer it as a feature to the DJs that they were having come in, because I was in Holland when EDM was like taking off. So I happened to be in the right place at the right time, which is also 90% of success in music or film art. I met this guy named Matt Bach, and unfortunately he just passed away 2 weeks ago. But he was like a second parent to me, and he was a mentor, and he had been very successful in business and manufacturing, specifically like roofing products. And so he said, hey, I have this. I expressed to him that I wasn't happy and I didn't want to do music anymore. I was just tired of it. I just was tired of being marginalized and leveraged and taken advantage of and not paid. And then, they boost your confidence with, oh, you're so great and this and that, but then no one wants to pay you. So I was just done. And he said, well, why don't you come work for me? And maybe you can learn to weld, because we need people to weld. And I had worked with my hands my whole life through family businesses and stuff, and through real estate that my parents had. You work on the stuff that you're renting, right? So I said, yeah, let me do it. And so he said, I can't pay you right away, but I'll reimburse any expenses that you have, and I have a place for you to stay. You can live there. So I started over. Wow. I literally started from scratch in a field that
How old were you at this point?
Well, I'm 39. So this was I would say this is closer to like 13 or 14 years ago at that point.
Okay. But so starting over though, I mean, that can be, call it 25. That's a pretty dramatic time to just like hit the reset button, start from scratch, literally saying like, hey man, I can't pay you, but you can crash at a spot and I'll pay you for your expenses. But like, that's it. At any point, was there any part of you that's just like, what will my folks think? What will my siblings think? Or were you not thinking that deep? It's just like, I'm sick of engineering. I'm sick of this lifestyle. I just need to change regardless of how it comes about.
I think I have my dad's personality in that way, where he's so hard-headed that he doesn't really care what anybody else thinks. If he thinks it's going to be good for him, he just, he does it. He doesn't really think about it. And I think that has really helped me, because I think that if I had been, I would have just stuck with that business because it's the business I know. I had made a name for myself in it. If I could just tighten up a couple of things, maybe I'd be more successful, but I wouldn't have been happier. I would have been more successful, but not happier. And I know that. There was like a defining moment where I had a chance to go work in a big studio in LA, and I just didn't see it checking off those boxes of happiness, And so starting over for me, I wasn't worried about what my brothers and sisters thought. I wasn't worried really about I'm a little bit worried about what my parents thought, but my dad has always said, like, if you learn a trade, you'll never not eat. You know what I mean? You'll always have work. And it's true. Up to the moment that I started in that business to now, even if all I have right now wasted by the wayside and everything went bankrupt, I could go get a job right now and probably make significant money, Right. So doing that was the best, I think, decision I ever made. But it also gave me empowerment because I felt a different type of, what's the word? Success, I guess, or like gratification. I felt a different type of gratification. I would mix a record for somebody. I'd spend 2 or 3 days on editing vocals and blah, 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 and play it for them. And they'd be like, oh, it's good. Okay. You know what I mean? Oh, it's good.
Right,
Oh,
that's it.
yeah, so it only took
or
me,
they
like,
or they scrap it
or they
completely.
scrap it.
The
Or they
song
tell
doesn't
you,
even make
yeah,
the final
we
cut.
like it, but we're going to go in a different direction. Yeah, it sucks. But
Right.
when you're a welder or you're a fabricator and you make something, people are like, oh, wow, that's really cool. Or, wow, that's
And
great.
it's insanely hard. I tried it for the first time 2 months ago. We were working with air gas in Hawaii.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, I've seen it a million times. You flip over the mask, you feed the thing, you light the torch, whatever. Cool. Let me start. And like the things, the shit's flying all over the place. I'm like, I don't know how people do this. That's why, to your point, like to your father's point, you get good at something. Yeah, if you can learn a trade, you will never be without money. It is so freaking difficult. I definitely took for granted. And I grew up sort of working with my hands. My dad was like, he'd build everything. He'd build decks. He'd fix cars, fix brakes. Not for me, man. It was rough.
You just need
tough.
more time at it. When I started, I was terrible. I think everyone is. I mean, actually, I've seen some people that are kind of naturals at it, but I wasn't a natural. I'm still not a natural at welding. I still have to, if I don't weld for a long time and then I have to pick up a, stinger and weld something, I still have to, oh, wait, how do I do this again? And so in saying that, I learned the most difficult type of welding first and then the easier stuff after. So I learned to pipe weld, which is like arguably the most difficult way to weld because we were building a refinery. And without getting into like the real specifics of it, it's called plastic pyrolysis. It's where you take high density polyethylene. So it's like agricultural plastic pretty much. And you refine it back into crude, and then you refine that crude into distillates. As soon as I did it, like I said to you, I had a different kind of gratification, and I knew it was where I was supposed to be. Just like when I sat behind that drum set, I knew that was the instrument for me. When I got good as a welder and I got to use my brain about, three-dimensional thinking and three-dimensional spacing of things and how they come together, I knew, I was like, this is it for me. And so to get into the container thing, we were getting plastics and stuff from California in shipping containers. So there was a bunch of shipping containers at this yard. There was 10, 12, 40-foot high cubes. There was some 20s. So my buddy Dean was like, dude, there's all these shipping containers sitting around. Why don't we just grab one of them and turn it into something? You can weld, you can fabricate. I wasn't any good at the time, but we did it. And it's funny because he pulled me into that industry kicking and screaming. Like, I really didn't like shipping container modification. I thought it was hokey. I thought it was like fly by night. I didn't see what everybody else saw in it. I didn't see the endless uses of all, you can do this, you can do that, we can build pool. No, I just saw a bunch of work for, again, something that somebody wasn't gonna really appreciate that much until we finished the first one. And I saw the way that people appreciated it. And I was like, oh, wait, maybe he's onto something,
I'm happy you said that, though. I think it is something about, I don't know if because it's a standard, the simplicity outside looking in. I think I also felt the same way about the industry. And then you kind of get into it and it completely changes your perception. But the light bulb moment for you was after the first one, and you saw the reception of it. What was that like?
Well, so we made one, and we didn't know what to do with it. I made all the frames and I fixed the doors and stuff and made it real fantastic looking, but we didn't have any windows for it. We didn't put any glass in it. So we met a guy, and the guy was like, "Hey, I put together stuff for like CES, which is a Consumer Electronics Show, or like SEMA and stuff like that." So he said, "Why don't you bring it over to my shop and we'll turn it into something and like rent it to them at SEMA or CES." So we did some of that. And that was when I saw people like, oh, wow, this is really cool. Like when they were going to use it for like a convention space, and they would market it and they would put their logo on the side and do this and do that. And it started to click for me, but like not all the way. And it's funny because this is like before people were really doing this and like making houses. I mean, we're talking like almost 15 years ago now. So it's like people weren't quite there yet with using these for domicile or like residential or commercial space. They just weren't using it for that stuff. Maybe in Cali or in Vancouver, stuff like that. So we made one, and we kind of hit a plateau. So this would be our first plateau in shipping container thing. Was like, what are we going to do with this? So this guy, Tony Lopez, called me one day, and he was like, hey, I want to come see the container you guys are selling, because we were just going to sell it and just move on to something else.
Still just the one at this point.
One container. And that one container didn't have glass, didn't have any finishing in it, just had framing. I really just did all the welding and fabrication for it. And so this guy, Tony, comes and he says, I want to turn this into like a house, a tiny home. That's what I want to do. And we're like, whatever, you know? And
right, because nobody was doing it. To your point, this is super early, so nobody's doing it.
And I will give Tony all the credit. He got in that industry and he stayed in that industry. He owns a company called Alternative Living Spaces, and they're based in Nevada. And they're one of the biggest and probably one of the best. And it all started with the container that I had modified for them. And we didn't finish it. We didn't do anything like that. They literally finished it, put glass in it, put like a kitchenette, a bed. I don't know. I think they put bathroom stuff in it. And then they threw it up on YouTube, and it blew up. Like it got, this is a time when YouTube's not getting that many.
Still early YouTube, exactly.
Yeah. They had like 2.5 or 3 million views. And I remember being like, wow, I thought this was stupid, but this kid is right. You know what I mean? And I say kid because he was younger at the time. But yeah, he's stuck with it. He's got a huge business out in Nevada now, and we have that connection, and we'll always have that connection, which is great. So my buddy Dean's Canadian, and I mentioned that my father immigrated through Canada to come to the States, and so my buddy Dean was like, he was like, we should try to go do this in Canada. And so while I was up in Canada, So wait.
Yeah. So this is after that first one blows up. You see what Tony takes and does with it. Was the thinking, let's try to do it again, but let's do it a different way. And this is where the offer.
Not right away. I can tell you this. So I was like between jobs because that company that I was working for as a welder kind of was going in a different direction. So I was driving for Uber, and I happened to be at the Vegas shooting. And that kind of changed my mind about wanting to stay in Las Vegas anymore. I was like, after that shooting and after that night that I had to, deal with all of that, I was like, I think I'm good on Vegas. I think I can leave. Yeah. So that was the motion, or that was the decision that set in motion us going back into the container thing, because Dean was like, man, this is not going away. People love this stuff. They need it. The economy is changing. We had ideas to do, like public housing or affordable housing, those types of things. And it just seemed like with his connections and the forward-thinking mentality of Canada, or Toronto specifically, before COVID, it was a good idea. So this is I'll have pre-COVID conversation and post-COVID conversation, because Toronto was very forward-thinking. They wanted to use shipping containers for laneway houses, which in the States, especially in Florida, we call it an ADU, which is either accessory dwelling unit or auxiliary dwelling unit. It's just an additional house that you can put on your property, and like a mother-in-law or like in-laws or kids can live there. And so they were very forward-thinking. I'm talking 7 years ago now. At this point, they're like, you guys can use these to make laneway houses. So immediately we knew that we could do this there and it would be semi-successful. So we do that, and we ended up building, before we got into any kind of successful laneway houses or home builds, we got through a connection of ours, the contract to build construction offices for Verde Alliance.
And did you move? Were you living in Canada while you're doing this?
I was living there.
Okay.
Yeah. The destiny of life, you just never know how it's going to happen. But right as we started to have this conversation about selling containers to Verde Alliance, COVID hit. And because COVID hit, they could no longer have more than 2 people in a shipping container. So they needed a bunch of these things. So we built a bunch of them all during COVID. I was building like 3 a week by myself in a parking lot in the cold. Like it was terrible. I don't want to ever go back to that. But it cut my teeth in the industry. It cut my teeth in building multiple containers.
I was going to say, you probably got really, really good really fast. I mean, because you go from the 1 to now you're building 3 a week.
Yeah, and I really didn't have.
You're probably ripping through them.
Yeah, I didn't have that much help. I created a system for myself. We had a property that was just an open piece of pavement, and I was just like you just said. I was just ripping through them, three a week, sometimes 4. And I got really good at containers, like what crazy good. And then we got contracted a couple times to do like a house or a bunkie, which is like a cabin in Canada, and the finishing would be a little bit better. So then I got good at like higher end finishing, which is always important when you're doing residential stuff. Coming from the commercial industry, I was like, oh, residential's easy, man. That's a cakewalk, blah, blah, blah. It's really not, because the detail, the level of finishing that someone pays you to live in something is 50 times harder than a construction office, right? So then that made me better at that type of stuff. And through COVID, we got really busy and we got successful and made some money, and pretty much lost everything as COVID progressed through Canada and through some of the COVID requirements of like shutting down Home Depot.
When you say you lost everything meaning the momentum and the orders, or
everything.
Wow.
So to kind of I got stuck in Canada through COVID because my passport expired, and they closed the land bridge. So you couldn't land cross with, you can land cross with just a driver's license, which I would have been able to, but they closed it. And so it put me in a really, really bad spot because I couldn't like socialize with anybody because of the distancing laws. So I was staying at my at the shop that we had. I had to live there, and that was so bad for mental health.
You're stuck in Canada. The passport's expired, and you're living in the shop that you were working out of.
It was terrible. I never want to go back to that. I know people that from time to time will live in a shop or like live in their workspace, but I really don't suggest that for anybody because it's so stressful mentally. You know what I mean? Like you're disconnected from everyone, and then you don't have the normal things that you have at a home. You don't have a shower. You know what I mean? You don't have a kitchen. I mean, imagine not having a kitchen or a shower during COVID and trying to get food for yourself when Walmart's closed. Everything was closed, So it was difficult, man. I really had to go of it. I had very, very good friends. My friend Ross, Gran was a blessing for me. These are people that really came out of the woodwork, and I mean, I couldn't even come back without these guys.
I can only imagine. But there's no part of you while going through that, like, all right, when I get out of this, I got to go back to something different. But was there any part of you that's kind of, when I get on the other side of this, I want to change something?
Yeah. So I wanted to be with my family again. So I wanted to move back to St. Pete. And with the advent of Facebook and social media, Florida really didn't shut down. Like the juxtaposition between Florida COVID and Canada COVID, it was like
completely
Soviet Russia,
places,
and the United States in the 80s, right? So I will say it's funny that you bring that up because I haven't had these questions asked to me for quite a while, right? This is like a therapy session for me.
It's like that,
but it's good because I'm having to think about therapy. It. Yeah. I wanted to be with my family. That's the biggest change that I wanted to make. And I wanted to be in Florida and especially in St. Pete because I could never really make a go of it in St. Petersburg. Like growing up in St. Pete is not the St. Pete that we live in now. It was a retirement community. It was a little bit artsy, but no one lived here, and it didn't have the influx of money. There wasn't really a way to make good money here unless you had a family business or I mean, I really can't explain it. It wasn't the type of place that you heard about nationally, but now everyone knows about St. Pete. They know about the economy. They know about the art scene here, which is huge. It's just such a great cultural place. And so I knew I wanted to go home. And so I had to give up everything that I had in Canada. So the only thing that I was able to leave with was my pickup truck because they had changed the laws during COVID So you normally could stuff a bunch of stuff in a pickup truck or stuff a bunch of stuff in a container and just say, I'm shipping all of it. But during COVID, they wanted a ticket for each item because they were
They need to know everything's
they
going.
didn't want people to be sending anything. They wanted to like stifle that during that time. So to make it easy, I just left with my truck. And
in a lot of ways, this is kind of like another reset for you, right? I mean, yes, you're going to St. Pete.
This is the biggest reset.
This is the bigger one.
Yeah, this is the bigger one.
Yeah, I mean, you're going with your skills, but yeah.
Yeah, I had nothing, so I end up coming back to Florida. I moved back in with my parents at 30 something. You know, I'm 39 now. This is what, 4 years ago now, 5 years ago. That's not young, you know, and it was super depressing, but I think the reason I got through it was because I was coming out of something that was so oppressive and so damaging to the psyche that it was amazing. You know what I mean? Living with my parents after COVID and like it made it okay. If COVID didn't exist, I don't think I could have done it. Like, I don't think I could have had that reset because the rest of the world would have looked at me even crazy. You know, like, what are you doing? You're moving back to Florida, live with your parents in your 30s, right? So it kind of made it okay. And because, again, I came from a skilled background, like I was an iron worker up there. I worked for a fabrication company up there, aside from the container stuff before that. And I was very, very good at construction and very good at running crews, running guys, running equipment. I was certified on all heavy machinery. I got that in Canada. And so coming to Florida, I knew I just got to go get a job. If I go get a really good job, like a good skilled worker's job and make good money, I can do the container thing again here. And so that's what I did. I went and worked for my buddy's company, Bay Glass and Windows, and just installed impact, like hurricane windows and doors, and literally like put all my money into tools and all my money into thinking, like, how do I get this started again with a shop? I went and rented a shop before I ever had a business because I knew I needed to lock in my pricing, my rent. Otherwise, it's going to, if St. Pete keeps growing the way I think it's going to grow, I'm not going to be able to afford a shop.
It's funny what COVID did and sort of what it forced people into. I moved in with my in-laws as well during COVID. Yeah. So you sort of get to a point where, you know, the world is just going through this crazy change. You know, everybody probably needs to, you know, sit down with a psychiatrist at some point because it's just so much abrupt change and people are dying kind of left and right. And it forced me into, I wouldn't be in this position. We wouldn't be having this conversation. I don't think without COVID, without me kind of hitting reset and moving back in with my in-laws. And it's 2024 now. It was 21. This is 3 years ago. Yeah. So, you know, I'm like, I got 3 kids. My wife and I, you know, I'm 35. My friends are off doing stuff. And I'm like living with my in-laws in South Carolina. But sort of to your point, like when you chase what makes you happy and what you want to do, it sort of resets and reframes everything. And especially coming out of COVID, it doesn't seem nearly as bad. But I think sort of the through line and everything that you talked about to this point is, hey, I could be much more successful. I could make more money doing this. But it's not all about success as much as it's about my happiness, my sanity, and kind of doing what I feel like I'm called to do and what I want to do and what I'll ultimately enjoy doing. And I think there's a lot of power to that. You're back, you've got a job, you sort of pushed all your chips into the table, you rented a shop to store your tools in. And is it then when you're starting to sort of think about the idea of starting St. Pete and sort of going into business on your own from a portable storage perspective?
So I had kind of thrown the idea around of maybe starting a welding and fabrication shop, because that's kind of how I started in Canada as well. I was going to start with a welding and fabrication company, right? But I saw one issue with that is that, and this is not to be political or to get into that thing at all, but I saw a lot of really, really skilled immigrant welders that were, whether they're here legally or not legally, it doesn't matter. But I saw guys that had the trucks, they had rigs, They had welding rigs, and it would be, you know, like 2 Mexican guys or 2 Central American guys or 2 South American guys. And they were really good and they were really cheap.
Just crushing it.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know if I can do that. I immediately was like, well, I don't think that's going to work. You know what I mean? So I then started kind of doing my research and looking at containers around here. And I was like, well, I could do the container thing. I'm sure all this construction, I'm sure I could build some construction containers for people. I knew immediately that I needed to start the company in a different way. I needed to be first and foremost a shipping container company, not a shipping container modification company. I knew that I needed to get into the port and I needed to be able to buy containers at cost from shipping lines because I didn't have that during COVID. And it really, really hurt me when the constraint on all the supply chains happened. So now I go, well, I think I started with Container Exchange. I made the connections through Container Exchange to get directly with some of these larger companies. And then I literally just made St. Pete Box LLC. I just thought, well, everyone knows St. Pete and everyone knows Box, you know, so I just put it together. And I didn't believe that it was going to be available, and it was. So that was like serendipitous, right? And so first and foremost, I was like, I need to be able to buy containers for cheap, and I need to be able to get with the port. And again, it's just so funny, man, how life works. When you're doing something and it's just working and you're not getting a lot of pushback from the universe or from God or from whatever it is that you believe in. For me, I was working at Bay Glass and I went to go do a job with my buddy Ian, and the guy's house that we did, it was a guy named Mark Dubina, and he ended up being the head of port security for the Port of Tampa. And so I told him what I was doing. And at like the same week that I'm meeting him, I'm like making my LLC. I'm like, you know, trying to figure out how to get on the port property and all this stuff. And so, you know, we killed that job for him. We did a really, really good job, and he appreciated that. And he was like, man, if I can help you at any way with the port or with connections or with people to buy containers, he's like, I totally will. And he's a really great guy. And so I took him up on it, and I called him, and he got me all my stuff at the port. He connected me with all my people at the port.
Awesome.
If I didn't meet Mark, I don't think I would have been so far ahead so quickly. Because then right after that, I was like, okay, what do I need to be able to go to other ports now and be able to buy? Because I knew like I can only buy certain types of containers in Tampa because the other ones are not that popular. So I have to buy, let's say, 20-foot high cubes from Miami, or I have to buy open tops from Jacksonville. So I'm like, how can I get onto those properties? So then I look it up. I'm like, I need a TWIC card, which is, you know, Transportation Workers Identification Card. I don't have any kind of illegal background, never been arrested in my life. So I sign up for it. I get it. So now if I need to, I can go to Port Everglades or, you know, Jacksonville or Savannah and buy whatever I need to. So I knew, again, coming back to Florida and starting from scratch, I need to be the most legitimate company I can possibly be from the start, from the gate, right? And so getting all these kinds of certifications and stuff like that, becoming an NPSA member, right? And I thankful to my buddy at Florence that actually told me, he's like, if you're not in the NPSA, you're not in this business. He actually convinced me to go to the NPSA convention where you guys were.
It's crazy how things happen. And I don't think you probably don't figure out or make it, or the steps don't align the way that you needed them to align for kind of this to work out, had you not gone through everything that you went through, right? Like you grew up in St. Pete, you go to school in California, live in Holland for a bit, and then you move.
Sorry, it's Berkeley and Boston.
Oh, Boston. Yeah. Boston. Sorry, Berkeley. I was thinking UC Berkeley.
No, I would be probably in a totally different industry. I'd be a rocket scientist.
Berkeley and Boston, Holland, Vegas, Canada, back to St. Pete. I mean, all of these lived experiences sort of lead you to sort of where you are and kind of starting the business the way that you wanted to. And, you know, I think quite honestly, you know, I think your perspective and being open and wanting to learn and listening to your buddy to say, hey, you got to do MPSA, you know, all those things. I don't think there's sort of one formula to say you do exactly this and these things work. I think it all kind of works together. I'd say no differently The OmniView guys. I mean, we met Dropbox, and then that gave us our introduction into OmniView, and they're like, "Hey, are you guys going to MPSA?" And we were like, maybe. And we look up MPSA. We're like, all right,
Exactly.
I guess we're going to MPSA.
Yeah.
I guess we got to go there. I mean, even down to the name of the company, it's Boxed Up. It fits perfectly, but we mentioned sort of me being in the motion picture industry prior to this. People wanted us to change our name. They're like, man, it's kind of cool, but like box, I don't get it. And there are people in the company that are like, you guys, we should really think about changing the name Boxed Up into something else. But it's just funny how things work. You sort of just keep at it. We stumble in.
It was called Boxed Up when you guys were in film?
It's been Boxed Up from the day I came up with it. There was one other name that... No, it's always been Boxed Up.
That's so weird that you got into containers then.
I mean, I was shipping boxes physically myself. Okay. We were a rental marketplace. I was shipping like cameras and things like this and podcast equipment in a box. So hence the name Boxed Up. Right. But it didn't necessarily make that much sense when we were in motion picture, but it makes all the world of the sense now. I say all that to say, you really just never know where things are going to lead. So it's kind of awesome to sort of hear your winding story end up to where you are, and then the connections that you made for you to unlock sort of those things at the ports. On the business side, exactly sort of what it is that you guys do today and how you provide value to the customers, so to speak, if you could kind of give the St. Pete pitch.
Yeah. So again, because I've done this for a long time now, and I did it successfully once before, I kind of knew what I needed to replicate to remove some of the speed bumps that I had before. Legitimacy is the number one thing in the shipping container business. There's so much frivolous advertising and scams on Facebook Marketplace, and there are people that make this industry really, really hard to work in. So you have to strive almost harder than any other business to become a legitimate LLC, a legitimate broker and dealer for containers, have a legitimate shop space, a place where people can come and see your work. So I knew all of that, right? There was one more thing that I had to lick before I could really start to see success. And I've really only started to see any type of like financial success in the last month or two. But I'm being honest. Like, that's what's so crazy about this. You don't make a lot of money just selling shipping containers, and you don't make a lot of money doing like a shipping container office. We did one for Danny Duncan, who's like a famous YouTube guy, but we did it at a good cost, and he was really, really great to work with, and that gave us a little bit more visibility, and he's a good guy to jump off from for visibility. But there's not a lot of margin in those things. And so serendipitously, again, something happened that I knew was going to happen. I knew that this was going to happen 2 years ago when I started this. But I knew that a customer-facing company was going to approach me to build containers for them. And so that company is Lumara Containers. And Lumara is really good at customer acquisition. They're really good at doing custom container home designs and permitting and all the things that I'm not good at. I'm good at building shipping containers. I'm good at modifying shipping containers. I'm good at transporting shipping containers, selling them, renting them, all those things. But I'm not really great with interfacing with the customer because I don't have that infrastructure. I have tradesmen. I have framers, plumbers, electricians, welders, fabricators, grinders, right? So I have all that stuff. Those guys aren't good with customers. You know what I mean? And we don't have any in-house design teams, so we're forced to use outside engineers and architects. So I knew that had to come together. And so that jump off in the last couple of months has allowed us to get more customers for builds. We're doing a 3 40-foot high cube container build in Riverview. It's on the Alafaya River. It's going to be on television. I can't talk about much other than that, but you'll see it. You'll see it everywhere. It's going to be huge. And then we're doing a project for a guy in Ona, Florida, which is like southeast of St. Petersburg. And it's snowballing, man. It's really snowballing. It's starting to feel like it did in Toronto when people started to see what we had going on. And so the only thing that I'm not touching on in my industry is rentals. And I got to be honest, we've had the conversation before. I don't know. I don't know if I want to get into it. I don't know if I want to get into it. Everyone tells me to get into it. Everyone at MPSA, all my friends and colleagues, Jack from Central Virginia Containers, Casey and Aspen, Channing McCorriston in Canada, all these guys are like, you got to get into rentals. I don't know if it makes sense for me, you know? I mean, I know
and you've got your bread and butter. Yeah. And you've got your bread and butter. Trust me, I think rentals are awesome, but it sounds like you've got your niche, especially when you're getting momentum and sort of what you're doing right now. It'd be sort of a shame to take your eye off the ball kind of while things are starting to pick up steam and like you're kind of finding your groove right now.
Yeah. And to like kind of wrap everything up, there's two things that I learned really early on from mentors. One of them was from Dean, and he always said, don't grow too quickly and outpace yourself. Grow, plateau, stay on that plateau for a while, control your success, and then grow a little bit further. So we started in a 1,700 square foot shop. Where we're sitting right now is a 2,500 square foot shop, and I'm signing a lease tomorrow for a 5,100 square foot shop. So thank you. So over that 2 or 3 year period, we've grown. Maybe that is our final destination, but maybe it's not. Maybe we go on to a place where we build something out of containers, or we buy another building. But regardless, we haven't outpaced our growth. We've been really fiscally responsible for rent and all that stuff and overheads, very conscious of overheads, and not tried to be bigger than our own britches, right? But the other thing is, this is what Matt Bach told me. He said, never peak too early. And so being 39 and not having a great story I don't have a lot of success. I have a lot of failure, but I think I am not peaking too early at 39. I think I'm ready to now grow into some type of success that I can control. I'm always so curious to learn about other people that I'm a fan of, and I'm a big fan of Boxed Up. I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing, and I'm just happy to be involved at this point.